So the developmental theories, again, there are three types: life course, latent trait, and trajectories. So this video is going to be about latent trait theories. And so this is all about the fact that development is controlled by some master trait present either at birth or soon after. So latent trait theories then say there's some kind of personal attribute or characteristic, i.e. a trait, that affects criminal propensity. And so this is present at birth or early in life, and it's stable over time. So something like personality would be a stable trait that you have over that over your life course that starts very early in life, which is why I've got those 4 basic personality types there. So the first question that should come to your mind is, well, what about the aging out process? So we know that people age out of crime as they mature. We know that because we know that there's that age crime curve, and people are much less likely to commit crime as they age. So the answer to this is, when we look at latent trait theories, it is a function of opportunity. So the propensity to commit crime is still there, and if somebody has a higher likelihood to commit crime, they always have a higher likelihood to commit crime, but just opportunities start to disappear. And sort of as you age, you don't have as many opportunities to commit crimes, whether it's because of you just physically can't do those crimes anymore, you don't have as much time, you have other obligations, you're just maturing out, whatever the case may be. The propensity is still there, and it's still higher in certain people compared to other people, depending on whatever the latent trait is, but just the opportunity structure starts to change. And so you do still see stable differences between groups. So here's an example. We have an age crime curve here, and sort of the lighter bars are males and the darker bars are females. And so if we look at the males, here's the age crime curve for the males, and here's the age crime curve for the females. So both groups are more likely to be committing crime sort of in this age range, sort of the 15 to 18 to 20 sort of age range. And then they precipitously drop off as they age. Both groups do that, but you can see that the males are always more likely to commit crimes than the females, which is, it's true. Males are more likely to commit crimes than females. And so we see that there's that constant difference between our two groups, but yet they both still follow that age crime curve. And that's where you have that stable difference. So the people who are higher, more likely to commit crimes, are always going to be more likely. And so both groups are going to follow the age crime curve, but you're always going to see that stable differences between those groups. And so everybody goes down with age, but there's still always that difference between the groups. And that's what the latent trait would explain. So by far the most common latent trait theory is Gottfredson and Hershey's general theory of crime, which basically says that criminal propensity is all linked to low self-control. So this means that all crime can be explained by low self-control. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that impulsivity explains everything, but they do say that all crime is linked to this low self-control, or basically impulsivity and lack of forward thinking. And so basically here's what low self-control really means and kind of the things it can mean. So it's people who are insensitive, so they're not as sensitive to their own needs or others. They are physical as opposed to mental, so that's more about what their bodies can do rather than thinking about things. They're very short-sighted. They can't see to the future. They're less verbal, so less able to communicate. They have a very here and now orientation, so it's all about what they can get now. Very unstable social relationships, so they can't really hold a partner or a spouse for very long. They enjoy deviant behavior, so there is an enjoyment factor there. They are risk takers, so these are people who are not careful with sort of how they are living their life every day. They don't work for distant goals, often because they don't have distant goals. And so then they lack diligence, so they can't work towards something. They lack tenacity, which tenacity is basically being persistent and stubborn. So if you lack that, then means that you don't stick with things like long-term goals. They are more adventuresome. They're more self-centered, so it's about what they can get. They're shameless and imprudent, which basically means that they're lacking discretion. They're not cautious. They're more rash in their decision-making. They also lack cognitive and verbal skills, which kind of relates to some of these other things about not being able to communicate and develop these long-term goals. And they enjoy danger and excitement. So again, there's that enjoyment factor. Now, this doesn't mean that it always ends in criminal behavior. It doesn't mean this always leads to criminal behavior. It just means that the more impulsive somebody is, and the lower their level of self-control, then the more likely they are to engage in deviant and criminal behavior. So then Goffman and Hershey had to start sort of by talking about, well, what causes this impulsivity or low self-control? And so they said that the root cause is inadequate child-rearing processes. So this means that, relevant from very soon after birth, it would be things like absent punishment, so either there's no punishment, inconsistent punishment, which sometimes is worse than no punishment, or ineffective punishment. They also talked about poor supervision, poor attachment to maternal or family figures. Also parental criminality plays a role. And it's also somewhat intergenerational, where you have kids with poor parenting develop low self-control themselves. They grow up to have kids and then poorly parent their own kids, and so their own kids are more likely to develop low self-control. Goffman and Hershey say that there is potentially a biological basis. They say things like birth complications, including oxygen starvation, low birth weight, neuropsychological deficits, all may lead to low self-control. And so there is a difference, though, between criminal propensity versus criminal acts. And so the propensity, it's about sort of your likelihood of taking advantage of an opportunity. And so people with higher criminal propensity are more likely to take advantage of opportunities. But if those opportunities are not there, then the criminal acts will not happen. So it's all about propensity and opportunity. And so that explains why people with low self-control are not constantly committing crimes. And sometimes they may not at all, but they just do non-criminal impulsive things like bungee jumping and skydiving and riding a mountain bike down a mountain cliff. So things like that. So it's not always criminality that this leads to. So this also explains why rates may vary across location, across time, and groups. And so certain groups or locations may have just more opportunities. So everybody is more likely to commit crimes. And then also why people with high self-control may sometimes commit crimes. So people who otherwise in their life seem to demonstrate high self-control, maybe they have professional degrees and long-standing careers and relationships, but then suddenly they commit some kind of a crime. Well, it's because it's this idea of propensity plus the opportunity. So if there's a good enough opportunity for somebody, they will take advantage of it. And for everybody has that point at which they'll take advantage of that opportunity. It's just if you have a higher propensity, it means it takes less for something to be recognized as an opportunity. And so, but you need that propensity and the opportunity for a crime to happen. So the GTC does propose to explain all crimes across all offender categories. So they don't focus on a specific subset of the offender population or specific crime types. Like the routine activities theory focuses on interpersonal crimes. Social process theories focus a lot on juveniles, especially in terms of policy implications like the labeling theory and whatnot. But the GTC is like, nope, it's low self-control is at the base of all criminal offending. And it has gotten a lot of empirical support. The underlying relationship between low self-control and crime is supported by research done in multiple countries with multiple different groups and multiple different offender types. So there's a lot of support for this. Although typically it's that, it accounts for some of sort of how we can explain why people commit crimes, but there are other things that come that are involved as well. But it has received a lot of empirical support. But it's also got a lot of criticisms, and there's the general theory of crime. That's what the book looks like, and I have it somewhere on my shelf back there. But there are a lot of criticisms. So the first is that it's tautological in the sense that one of the ways that we can say that somebody has low self-control is because they commit crime. So you say, well, if you commit crime, that means that you have low self-control. But then we also use low self-control to explain why they are committing those crimes. So it's kind of circular reasoning. But the counter for this is that the impulsivity is not itself the propensity to commit crime, but it's in general not viewing behavior in the long term. And so impulsivity makes crime and many other behaviors just more likely, but it's not the only thing. So, but there is sort of some circular reasoning there. Also, it doesn't really explain different crime types all that well. At least this is one of the criticisms, in the sense that if there is one single factor that causes crime, if we're saying low self-control causes all crime, then why does it manifest so differently in different types of offenders? I mean, you have generalists versus specialists, you have violent versus property offenders, you have different pathways, you have people committing crime only in their adolescence and some people doing it over their life course. So how can we explain all these different crime types if there is just one factor that's supposed to explain it all? So, but I mean, this may be, again, a function of like opportunity and things like that, but also sort of what the individual offender needs and what their motivations are and things like that. It also, though, one of the criticisms is that it doesn't account for certain differences, like ecological differences, so differences in location. Because we see that there are major differences in, if we look at areas of the country, so some areas of the country has more crime, some big cities have more crime than urban areas or than rural areas. So we know that, and it's not just because of population, there's more to it than that, and so this doesn't really account for that. But Goverson and Hershey suggest that this is because of differences in opportunities or the draw of certain cities to impulsive people. So that they say that basically people who are impulsive are naturally going to want to live in like big cities where a lot is going on. But I mean, is that enough to explain it? I don't know. There's racial differences. So we know that certain racial groups are more likely to be criminals than others. But we know that that's because of things like institutional racism and poverty, relative deprivation, and the GTC kind of overlooks all that. It just says, Goverson and Hershey just said, well, these racial overrepresentations are because of less effective child-rearing practices, especially in the African-American community. And so they say it's that is what causes low self-control. And I mean, people didn't really take too well to that. Also, morality differences can't really be explained in the sense that if somebody has deep in morals, that may trump their low self-control that they have, which then it'll make that factor really important, the connection between low self-control and crime. So if somebody has really low self-control, but they also have really high integrity and morality, then they're still not going to take advantage of opportunities, even though they have this low self-control, because their morality stops them. So that it doesn't really account for that either. And also the effects of peers, because the general theory of crime would support the idea that the influence of peers should be stable. The friends you make later in life shouldn't affect your propensity, because the propensity should be relatively stable. But the GTC does say that impulsive kids will seek out other impulsive kids. So kind of like how the big cities draw people in, impulsive kids are drawn to other impulsive kids. And so then that's why they become friends. So, but I don't know, does that account for it? There's also the idea that people change. Research has supported many ways in which criminals or people at risk can change this propensity, turn their life around. And this goes against the GTC, which says that it's a stable trait. Although the GTC would suggest that changes in opportunity and personal abilities would account for those differences. And so there is that. But this includes the effect of positive parenting, which can have an effect later on in the life course than what's predicted by the general theory of crime. So it can't really explain why people suddenly decide that they don't want to commit crime anymore, and people do desist from crime, and it can't really explain that. Research has found a modest relationship at best, suggesting that there's other relevant factors besides low self-control at play, including social factors, neuropsychological factors, physiological factors, situational factors. There's a whole lot at play, and so it's, maybe low self-control is part of the picture. It's a piece of the puzzle, but it's not everything, the way that Goverson and Hershey kind of made it sound. And of course, it also comes up the idea that some criminals aren't impulsive, and gang members will work for years at lower positions in the hopes of moving up, eventually making a whole lot more money, even though most actually don't make it that far up the ranks. Also, some crimes are really well planned and even meticulous, like a murder that's planned for years. And so can the GTC explain that? And then there are also different types of impulsivity. So some people might be more overwhelmingly impulsive in everyday life, while others just don't think things through all the way, or maybe they're just more likely to give in when there's enough pressure. And it doesn't negate the GTC, but it was never really put forward by Goverson and Hershey. So these are not necessarily all criticisms enough to say that the GTC is useless, but certainly makes you question some of what's going on.